If you're preparing for a sales interview and you think the way that you're going to get a job offer is by having a perfect answer to the question, tell me about yourself, or tell me about a time you overcame adversity, or you keep practicing these cold call scripts so you can crush your mock call, you're missing the point entirely. Most resources on the internet, whether it's a TikTok or a YouTube that says, how to answer the question, tell me about yourself, or how to answer the question, tell me about a time you overcame adversity. They would love to make you think that it's as simple as having a perfect answer. But I can tell you from my own experience and also now coaching hundreds of people at higherlevels.com, the top performers getting the best jobs in the world are people that are playing a fundamentally different game. Lastly, for reference, I was formerly an engineer making about $75,000 a year. I transitioned into tech sales about 5 years ago, and over the course of 5 years, I've not only quadrupled my income, I have interviewed with some of the fastest growing companies in the world, as well as Fortune 100 companies, and on multiple occasions, I've negotiated anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 raises on my offers before even working a day in the office because I understood the interview process and how to gain leverage throughout. And this is really the fundamental point of this entire video that I'm gonna start with, which is what is the structure of the interview process? Compared to the average person who's thinking, how do I tweak my resume? How do I answer these questions well? They're fundamentally showing up and they're just happy to be there and they're just responding to all the questions they get asked. They're not taking control. They're not even thinking about the fact that, maybe this recruiter or VP of sales is extremely busy and borderline forgot that they had an interview today and really wants to be doing anything other than talking to a lackluster or average candidate. When you understand this, you can start to think, how can I take control of this process? How can I do something that's not different and weird, but shows that I'm an above average candidate regardless of my background, regardless of my credentials? Let's break down the interview process into its smallest parts. You have the application process, which is, I think, one of the biggest places that the average person overlooks, and we'll break that down here shortly. And then when it comes to the actual interviews themselves, it may change a little bit here or there depending on the company, but you're gonna have a screening interview with the recruiter, you're gonna have an interview with the sales manager, you will probably at that point have some type of exercise, whether it's a cold call or a discovery call mock exercise. And lastly, some companies will have you interview with, as an example, the VP of sales, the CRO, or maybe even at startups, the CEO as a final round culture check interview. And so as we look at the application process and really talk about what it takes to stand out, I also just want to reiterate, while the average person is not thinking about this, what I'm about to tell you does not require like all-nighters or 40 hours a week or doing something fundamentally different. You're doing 5 to 10% more if you do this correctly than the average person, and that is enough by far to stand out. But looking at the application process itself, even if you have a good resume, or maybe you don't, it is a non-negotiable now in 2025 and beyond that you should absolutely be messaging the recruiter, the hiring manager, and other SDRs within the account to try and break in. This accomplishes a couple of things, and I will also compare it to what the average candidate is doing and how this makes you stand out. Of course, if you're writing good messages, you're showing your ability to do the job as a salesperson, but also I think this is an incredible way to start a dialogue with the ultimate decision maker, whether it's the sales manager, a VP of sales, someone in a position of authority that's ultimately gonna make a decision at the final round. Maybe you're an average person. Maybe like me, I was a Dean's List scholar. I'm a former national team athlete. Because on paper, I had a solid resume, that would get me in a lot of interviews. But when it came to the final round, if there was a 19-year-old or a new college grad who was actually messaging and breaking into the company themselves, they always beat me in the final rounds because not only did they get that first round interview just like me, but from the get-go, they had a direct line of communication to the recruiter, to other reps at the company, to maybe the manager or the VP of sales. And when it came to that final round decision, all things else equal, if we both crushed the final round interview, we both had a good culture check, the person who's winning and getting that offer is the person who messaged the recruiting manager from the start to get their interview set up. And so we will move on to the next part from here, but I just want to reiterate, even if you have a strong resume, even if you're getting interviews, if you are not messaging the hiring manager with a simple 3 to 4 sentence message about, hey, here's my background, here's what really stood out about your company, could we meet for 15 minutes to see if it's a mutual fit? If you're not doing that, you will lose in the final round and not really be given a reason as to why, except for we went with someone who has more experience. And I've seen it time and time again. So now let's say you've sent that great message, you've started off on the right foot, you're already playing in a different category than 90% of applicants, and you've got this first round screening interview now coming up. This is where, by far, the most people lose once they've secured an interview. This first round, so many people overcomplicate this, and if nothing else, please just believe me, just pause. Free your mind here from all the possibilities of what should I say, how should I do this, and we'll get into how to answer some of the most common questions. You need to understand the purpose and the structure of this recruiter interview. It is generally going to be maybe 15 to 20 minutes. On rare occasion, it might be 30. But you got to keep in mind, the recruiter is talking to 10 to 20 people a day. The recruiter has heard your answer, I guarantee you, a million times. And even if you have an answer that they've heard before, it's not a bad thing. Their job here is to filter out the dog shit. So when it comes to this interview, keep in mind the recruiter is probably going through the motions. They've done a million of these. The structure is the same. But again, when you understand the structure, you can exploit it. You can come in with just a little bit different of an angle. You can make this so easy for the recruiter that it's a no-brainer for them, and within 3 minutes, they'll decide that they want to move you on to the next round. I cannot stress this enough. It is genuinely this simple. The first round screening interview, in 90% of cases, there may be 1 or 2 more additional questions you'll have to deal with, but every single one of these has the following questions. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to go into sales? And why do you want to work for this company specifically? And if you cannot answer those questions, do not spend any time worrying about anything else. Additionally, when you know that this is the structure of this interview, you can answer your questions in a way that gets out in front of these answers, and I'll explain what I mean. Because instead of spending 20 minutes doing the usual, the recruiter has to go, oh, why do you want to do sales? Oh, that's interesting. What did you mean about this? Oh, cool, okay, what did you like about our company? And they're going through the motions, their brain is shut off, and I don't know, because it's 2:30 in the afternoon and they're a little bit more tired, they're probably just gonna say no because you had a very average conversation at best, even though you answered questions decently well. Instead of waiting for them to ask these questions, structure your answer in tell me about yourself to get out in front of all of these questions. And I've made a video about this, I'll link it in the description as well. But just as an example, 90 seconds on tell me about yourself. And in this 90 seconds, you want to briefly touch on the major highlights in your career to this point. You don't have to explain everything. This isn't your life story. And in the last 15 seconds of this, you tie all of that into why you want to go into sales specifically at that company. And so you're not answering all the questions in depth. You're not spending 5 minutes answering all of the details. You'll let the recruiter ask follow-up questions as well. But when you get out in front of this, I guarantee you, you will see the recruiter's complexion completely change. But you can skip all the bullshit. You can skip all the pleasantries, and you can get into a real conversation about why they like working at that company, what they see in top performing candidates. And I guarantee you, if you close the interview and say, hey, this was an awesome conversation, really strong impression compared to all the other companies I'm talking about, I'm curious if you have anything that would prevent you from pushing me forward to the next round. Point blank, done. And guys, I know this is a pre-recorded video. I know I make it sound simpler than it truly might be in a game time situation. And I have failed these interviews, and I'm only this passionate about it because I failed this myself and want to go back to my younger self and just shake them until they understand how simple this can be if you truly prepare the right way. All you need to prepare for this first round interview is a 90-second response, tell me about yourself, a 60-second response about why you want to be in sales, and a 60-second response about why you want to work at that company specifically. Once you have that down, everything else, if you have any shred of improvisational skills, could be a cool conversation about your background, maybe a deeper dive into something you have in common. But I guarantee you, with those 3 questions optimized, you will win 99% of those first round interviews and immediately be seen as a top performer. So if you've made it this far, I hope you're starting to see how top performers are playing a completely different game altogether. You've already established yourself as a top performer by crushing that first round interview. Even before that, with the application process, you've started dialogues with the recruiter, hopefully the sales manager, and maybe a sales rep or 2 on the team that reports to that manager. Now going into this interview, you've already perfected half of it, which is going to be, again, the sales manager asking you, tell me about yourself, why do you want to do sales, why do you want to work at this company? But before I get into the rest of that, the reason that top performers are dominating this process is before they even go into these interviews, like I said, they've already messaged that sales manager and ideally maybe even set up a 15-minute virtual coffee chat with a sales rep on their team to ask them about what the company's like. What are they looking for in top performers? How does an interview candidate really stand out in the process? And you have so much ammo and leverage coming into this. The average person, again, is like, oh man, I got that second round interview. I'm so excited. What should I say? How do I impress the sales manager? You're coming in with just a completely different mindset, body language, and everything right from the start. And so again, getting into the ins and outs, the X's and O's of this interview, a sales manager is probably going to ask you, tell me about yourself, why do you want to do tech sales, and why do you want to work at this company specifically? It's really not more complicated than that as the overall structure of the interview, and you can answer it mostly the same as your first round. But what you should expect at this point is the manager now is going to dive really deep into your experience. So if you lay it out in a very concise and digestible way, they're going to ask you after you say, tell me about yourself, and you give that 90-second response, they're going to say, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, the recruiter mentioned they really liked that experience. I noticed you mentioned in your last job that you did this 15% better than your peers, or you rewrote this process. I guess walk me through that. And so when you're thinking about how to prepare for the sales manager interview overall, it's really a matter of making sure your stories, aside from just the generic 90-second tell me about yourself, now you've got to make sure that at least you've got maybe 3 to 5 stories about your background where you can really dive deep and show that you've actually led some type of meaningful change. I'd also expect potentially a couple questions around, tell me about a time where you overcame adversity, tell me about a time where you received harsh feedback, tell me about a time where you worked on a team. And again, there's more resources in the description on how I advise that you answer those in the first place. However, I think the important thing is you set the tone again with the beginning of that interview by laying out your experience concisely, being willing to talk about anything the sales manager has to ask, but also in any case, when you give a great answer or you talk about your experience and defend the accomplishments that you have in more depth, you could ask them, as an example, I get asked a lot about my athletic experience. I'll go into detail. I did all of these different things. I did that while I was an engineering student. I'm curious, have you ever hired athletes before, and how have they panned out, right? And so there's many things, again, in different videos that we get into the tactics, but this is not the Da Vinci Code. This is not overly complex. When you have really solid answers, when you're playing a fundamentally different game, you're gonna come in and absolutely control this interview as well, because the sales manager, man, they are so busy. They had 3 one-on-ones this morning. They had to talk to their VP. They had to answer to their CRO as to why the team is missing their target this month. They really don't have time to sit there and talk with a boring person or an average candidate. And quite frankly, if you come in right out of the gate and you're lackluster or even average, they're probably filtering you out right away. Realistically, a sales manager is probably trying to find 3 to 5 people of the 10 to 15 that they interview to go to that final round interview. So you've made it this far in the process. We've got a few steps left. This will be a mock cold call or discovery call, depending on the company. You're probably going to have one final conversation with a panel or a VP of sales or a CRO. And then lastly, the average person is thinking that's it, and they're just hoping for an offer. We're actually going to talk about how to negotiate for a higher salary when you've been doing these things correctly. But realistically, if you're going into this mock call, it is a big, important stage to execute very well on, but you're probably one of 3 people that they're seriously considering at this point. And when it comes to how to actually run a cold call and discovery call, I've linked a lot of resources in the description as well. But general principles here, just for your reference, are you're talking less and listening more. You're asking questions first to see what they're doing today, how they're doing that, why that is a limitation, why they even want to make a change in the first place. And only once you've uncovered that information, then you're positioning a little bit about your product and ultimately asking them if they want to take a meeting, right? This is in the example of a cold call. But really, I want to focus now on the VP of sales or CRO or CEO as an example that you may talk to in a final round. At this point, it's really a vibe check. I mean, you'd have to try really hard to mess this up. And one of the things that I see, quite frankly, is people get to this stage and they're treating it like it's their first interview. Like, oh man, I got to prove myself. What should I say? It's like, to some extent, don't get overconfident, but relax, because if you've made it this far in the process, they've clearly identified you as a top performer, and realistically, you're one of about 3 people that they actually are seriously considering giving an offer to. So if you come in and you're antsy, and you're trying to prove yourself, and you're trying to show why you're better than everyone else, as opposed to just executing on this interview, showing that you've got some poise, you've been there before, you're willing to do what it takes, that's honestly where I see a lot of people mess up, because they almost try too hard at this final stage to show that they're a fit, to show that they're better than everyone else. And so again, you have done 80 to 90% of the work if you've made it this far in the interview process anyway. The VP of sales knows you're a good candidate. They have heard from the sales manager why they're even talking to them in the first place. But keep in mind, the VP of sales has had to talk to the CEO today. They've had to talk to reps. They've had to have one-on-ones with their direct reports. They're busy as shit. And honestly, interviews, when you get to the level of VP and you're interviewing an entry-level sales candidate, I'm not trying to say it's not important or make you feel insignificant, but keep in mind, make this process easy for them. They just want to see, yep, that person's good. That's exactly what the SDR manager explained to me. That's exactly what the recruiter said. And they met and exceeded my expectations. There's no need to overcomplicate this. Don't worry so much about the low-level details. You're not necessarily going to get grilled on, hey, your resume said this, so tell me about how you did X, Y, and Z. At this stage, it's more important to project confidence, show that you're willing to do what it takes, and honestly have, pending where the VP's at, maybe they're more tactical, maybe they're more relaxed and want to have conversations about, I don't know, vacations or hobbies or sports or whatever it might be. Just be prepared in that situation to have more of a genuine conversation about life, about working hard, about all of these different things, as opposed to getting grilled like you did by the sales manager. And I know the person who's watching this video is thinking, no, seriously, what should I say? What question should I prepare for? But again, with the resources linked below, with all of the possible questions you've prepared for and answered already at this point, it's probably just going to be a mashup of everything you've heard. And so it's really about your body language, it's really about how you control the conversation, and it's really about how you show your willingness to go above and beyond and just match all of the things that that VP has heard from the sales manager and recruiter at that point. All right. This is the last and most fun portion of the interview process where you get an offer and negotiate. Most average people aren't even getting here, but also this is a missed opportunity with a lot of people who, again, are just excited to get that offer and leave anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 on the table. Lastly, as we get into this, just calling out that I do monitor the comments directly myself. I know we've gone over a ton so far, so if you do have any questions, fire away below. Happy to give you some guidance one-on-one. But nonetheless, the biggest mistakes that I see here in the final portion of this interview process where you actually get the offer is either trying to negotiate the second you get the offer or just outright accepting without even trying to negotiate at all. I know negotiating, if you've never done it, can be a scary thing, and oftentimes you're happy to get a job. There may be situations where, hey, if you take the job, at the end of the day, get your foot in the door, get that experience. But I've also coached tons of candidates who have asked for a raise, didn't get it, but they did so in a way that was polite and respectful. The job offer was still on the table, and they still ultimately got the job as the sales representative. And quite frankly, I think any sales manager, even if they don't give you a raise, when it's done correctly, will respect the fact that you asked for a raise. Again, you're just showing traits of an effective salesperson and things that you're gonna have to do when it comes to business negotiation with clients, et cetera, et cetera. You have crushed every single stage of this interview. At this point, this is where you can capitalize and get an extra 10 to 20,000 by making them very aware in a respectful way that you actually do want to take a few days to think about it. You've got a few conversations going on in parallel. They are the front runner by far, but you just need to make sure that you get all of the information from everyone. And so what I mean is the recruiter is going to call you and say, hey, man, we really love this. I'm so excited. We finally get to extend an offer for you. Here's an overview of what it is. We'll have more information in an email. What do you think? You ready to get started? And again, the biggest mistake people make is they either take it right then and there or they negotiate right then and there on the phone. Both approaches are flawed. It's simply a matter of thanking them for their time, thanking them for the progress, letting them know, hey, if you don't mind, this has been, an exceptional process. It's gone way faster than I think. I do have one other conversation going on currently, and my only ask is if I could have 2 days and give you an answer by the end of the day Friday, would that work to give you a formal yes or no? At that point, I would expect some resistance. I would expect them to be like, okay, like who are you talking to? Or like, how are you feeling about it? And again, you want to reassure them, hey, I am talking to one other company. You're not going to give them any specifics. You may tell them that you are expecting an offer, but that's it. That's the most you're going to share with them. And then at that point, it's really a matter of saying, hey, listen, this process has been great. You guys are the front runner by far. I just need to take everything in. I know I've spent a lot of time with the other company, so I just want to see what they ultimately share, and maybe I could set up some time with you on Friday afternoon to give you a final answer, right? So whether you schedule it there or whether you leave the call and ask them, hey, could I just text you or email you to set up a time on Friday and give you a final answer? At that point, it may not be a comfortable conversation. That is what you want. Because again, if you've been doing everything I'm talking about, you're playing in a different league altogether, you are their first choice. They are willing to do what it takes to get you. And while ultimately at the end of the day, some companies may not be able to pay you more, a great sales manager is going to respect the fact that you asked in a very respectful way, because this is what you're going to have to do on the job on a daily basis. So lastly, when it comes to negotiating, let's say it's Wednesday, you ask them to give an answer by Friday, you're going to text or email or whatever communication you already have going on with the recruiter. You're going to send them a message on Thursday, roughly midday, maybe late morning, and say, hey, could we set up some time Friday? I've got a few final questions and just want to sync up on the opportunity. At which point you get a 15-minute call on the calendar for Friday. You're gonna have a conversation with them. I literally can't stress this enough. Just copy what I'm gonna say word for word. Hey recruiter, really appreciate you taking the time. This has been an awesome experience and really just wanted to be transparent with you. Where I'm at right now is you guys came in at 80. I feel much better about this opportunity than the other one. However, they did come in at 95, which is appealing in some ways, but really where I'm at, I think this is the overall better opportunity, and I haven't made a firm decision yet, but what I can tell you is if you were able to come in at $90,000, I would be willing to sign with you today and go ahead and reject the other offer for 95. And I guarantee you, even if they say no, you've made it clear that you're the front runner, you haven't told them if they can't match that, it's a no, and you've done so in a way that actually concedes that, hey, if you pay me more, I'm not even expecting that you pay me as much as this other opportunity. I still respect the fact that even if it's not the same amount of money, if you can meet me at this point in the middle, it's a no-brainer for me to move forward with you. And again, most of the times they'll say yes. If they don't say yes, then you still will have the opportunity on the table. They're not going to be offended you asked. And at that point, you can make the decision that is best for you. But man, if you made it this far, props to you. This was a super deep video, and I hope you got a ton out of it. I'd also add, again, comment below. If I can help you in any way, shape, or form, feel free. And also just calling out that this is what we do at higher levels, specifically with our Tech Sales Ascension program. We have tons of people that are looking for live coaching. They're looking for people to help them take their direct experience and mold it in a way that's very attractive to recruiters and tech companies. And really this last year alone, we have helped more people than the prior 2 years combined break into the best companies in the world, whether it's AWS, Oracle, Salesforce, Snowflake, you name it. But nonetheless, again, we make these YouTube videos because I know not everyone's in a position to look for coaching, and quite frankly, this video may be all you need. So regardless, I hope you guys got a lot out of it. Really appreciate the time, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.